Jewel and I come up from the field, following the path in single file. Although I am 15 feet ahead of him, anyone watching us from the cotton house can see Jewel's frayed and broken straw hat, a full head above my own. The path runs straight as a plumb line, worn smooth by feet and baked brick hard by July, between the green rows of laid-by cotton to the cotton house in the center of the field, where it turns and circles the cotton house at 4 soft right angles and goes on across the field again, worn so by feet in fading precision. The cotton house is of rough logs, from between which the chinking has long fallen, square with a broken roof set at a single pitch. It leans in empty and shimmering dilapidation in the sunlight, a single broad window in 2 opposite walls giving unto the approach of the path. When we reach it, I turn and follow the path in circles the house. Jewel, 15 feet behind me, looking straight ahead, steps in a single stride through the window. Still staring straight ahead, his pale eyes like wood set into his wooden face, he crosses the floor in 4 strides, with the rigid gravity of a cigar store Indian dressed in patched overalls and endued with life from the hips down, and steps in a single stride through the opposite window and into the path again just as I come around the corner, in single file and 5 feet apart, and Jewel now in front. We go on up the path toward the foot of the bluff. Thus begins the 1930 classic As I Lay Dying, as it was penned by William Faulkner. William Faulkner, as he was, is known as an incredibly difficult read, and in fact, reading Faulkner out loud is one of the not-so-secret secrets to understanding the author. As this novel is in first person, it speaks to you the way the characters themselves would speak to you, and just from that small snippet that I read, but 3 paragraphs, we have introduced 2 characters, Darrell, by whom and for whom the chapter itself is named, and Jewel, his brother. By noting the cotton house, by noting the field, by noting the path that runs plumb line, as straight as plumb line, we have a little bit of setting, but we have more setting as the path is, in fact, baked brick hard by July. That is place and time. We understand immediately that there is something different between Darrell and Jewel by the fact that although Darrell is 15 feet ahead of him, anyone watching them from the cotton house can see Jewel's frayed and broken straw hat a full head above his own. We know that though they are related, there is something a bit different between them, but not just that. In something bordering between spoiler and foreshadowing, he crosses the floor in 4 strides with the rigid gravity of a cigar store Indian dressed in patched overalls and endued with life from the hips down. We get that there is something ethereal about Jewel, and what a strange place to be imbued with life from the hips down. Might that mean something? And what about that appearance, the appearance of being a cigar store Indian? We should probably put that in our back pocket for later as well. But we also understand a little bit about the family and their situation as a whole. The cotton house is of rough logs, from between which the chinking has long fallen. Square with a broken roof set at a single pitch, it leans in empty and shimmering dilapidation in the sunlight. They're not well off. But it's not just that either. We get a little bit of characterization between these 2 brothers. We have Darrell, who was out front and walked around the house in seemingly meandering fashion, observing the property, observing his brother, observing the livelong day as he went, but not Jewel, with this almost otherworldly drive, determination, and spirit, went straight through the cotton house, stepped in one window, walked across the floor, stepped out the other window, and was suddenly leading his brother. I promise I'm going somewhere with this. I'm going to read this same excerpt one more time, now that we've talked about it for a little bit. Jewel and I... Oh, wait, hold on. We also get a little bit of diction. We get a little bit of hint about where this back country is. This is not just some house in the middle of the city. Jewel and I come up from the field. We have straight as a plumb line. Phrases like this lead us to believe that these are not just characters living in the country. These are, in fact, country folk. So let's read this excerpt one more time. Jewel and I come up from the field, following the path in single file. Although I am 15 feet ahead of him, anyone watching us from the cotton house can see Jewel's frayed and broken straw hat, a full head above my own. The path runs straight as a plumb line, worn smooth by feet and baked brick hard by July. Between the green rows of laid-by cotton to the cotton house in the center of the field, where it turns and circles the cotton house at 4 soft right angles and goes on across the field again, worn so by feet in fading precision. The cotton house is of rough logs, from between which the chinking has long fallen. Square with a broken roof, set at a single pitch, it leans in empty and shimmering dilapidation in the sunlight. A single broad window in 2 opposite walls, giving onto the approaches of the path. When we reach it, I turn and follow the path which circles the house. Jewel, 15 feet behind me, looking straight ahead, steps in a single stride through the window, still staring straight ahead, his pale eyes like wood set into his wooden face. He crosses the floor in 4 strides with the rigid gravity of a cigar store Indian, dressed in patched overalls and endued with life from the hips down, and steps in a single stride through the opposite window and into the path just as I come around the corner. In single file and 5 feet apart, and Jewel now in front, we go up the path toward the foot of the bluff. All of the rich detail that we just talked about happens in 266 words right at the beginning of a classic novel by one of the greatest American novelists. But the novel is difficult, and it gets more difficult from here. And so I beg the question, do we have to read the classics? Are the classics worth it? To be quite frank, I think my conclusions here might be a bit surprising to anyone who has been around the channel for any length of time. To really begin to dig into this subject, I'm going to turn to what might seem an unlikely source. Morality. An essay titled The Subjectivity of Values by J.L. Mackey. In a subtitle called Standards of Evaluation, Mackey writes this, quote, "One way of stating the thesis that there are no objective values is to say that value statements cannot be either true or false. But this formulation, too, lends itself to misinterpretation. For there are certain kinds of value statements which undoubtedly can be true or false, even if, in the sense I intend, there are no objective values. Evaluations of many sorts are commonly made in relation to agreed and assumed standards. The classing of wool, the grading of apples, the awarding of prizes at sheepdog trials, flower shows, skating and diving championships, and even the marking of examination papers are carried out in relation to standards of quality or merit which are peculiar to each particular subject matter or type of contest, which may be explicitly laid down, but which, even if they are nowhere explicitly stated, are fairly well understood and agreed by those who are recognized as judges or experts in each particular field. Given any sufficiently determinate standards, it will be an objective issue, a matter of truth and falsehood, how well any particular specimen measures up to those standards. Comparative judgments in particular will be capable of truth and falsehood. It will be a factual question whether this sheepdog has performed better than that one. The subjectivist about values, then, is not denying that there can be objective evaluations relative to standards, and these are possible in the aesthetic and moral fields as in any of those just mentioned. More than this, there is an objective distinction which applies in many such fields, and yet would itself be regarded as a peculiarly moral one: the distinction between justice and injustice. In one important sense of the word, it is a paradigm case of injustice if a court declares someone to be guilty of an offense of which it knows him to be innocent. More generally, a finding is unjust if it is at variance with the relevant law and the facts together require, and particularly if it is known by the court to be so. More generally still, any award of marks, prizes, or the like is unjust if it is at variance with the agreed standards for the contest in question. If one diver's performance, in fact, measures up better to the accepted standards for diving than another's, it will be unjust if the latter is awarded the higher marks or the prize. In this way, the justice or injustice of decisions relative to standards can be thoroughly objective in matter, though there may still be a subjective element in the interpretation or application of standards. But the statement that a certain decision is thus just or unjust will not be objectively prescriptive. In so far as it can be simply true, it leaves open the question whether there is any objective requirement to do what is just and to refrain from what is unjust, and equally leaves open the practical decision to act in either way. Recognizing the objectivity of justice in relation to standards and of evaluative judgments relative to standards, then, merely shifts the question of the objectivity of values back to the standards themselves. The subjectivist may try to make this point by insisting that there is no objective validity about the choice of standards. Yet he would clearly be wrong if he said that the choice of even the most basic standards in any field was completely arbitrary. The standards used in sheepdog trials clearly bear some relation to the work that sheepdogs are kept to do. The standards for grading apples bear some relation to what people generally want or like about apples, and so on. On the other hand, the standards are not, as a rule, strictly validated by such purposes. The appropriateness of standards is neither fully determinate nor totally indeterminate in relation to independently specifiable aims or desires. But however determinate it is, the objective appropriateness of standards in relation to aims or desires is no more of a threat to the denial of objective values than is the objectivity of evaluative relative to the standards. In fact, it is logically no different from the objectivity of goodness relative to desires. Something may be called good simply in so far as it satisfies or is such as to satisfy a certain desire. But the objectivity of such relations of satisfaction does not constitute in our sense an objective value. End quote. All of this is to say that though we cannot judge a novel as classic in any real numeric fashion or by any real scientific method when we are in the field of the master, when we are at play in the world of a Hemingway, in the world of an Emily Dickinson, in the world of a Shakespeare. There is something qualitatively different than, for example, the following, quote, "My mother drove me to the airport with the windows rolled down. It was 75 degrees in Phoenix. The sky is a... Pardon me. My mother drove me to the airport with the windows rolled down. It was 75 degrees in Phoenix. The sky a perfect, cloudless blue. I was wearing my favorite shirt, sleeveless, white eyelet lace. I was wearing it as a farewell gesture. My carry-on item was a parka. In the Olympic Peninsula of northwest Washington State, a small town named Forks existed under a near constant cover of clouds. It rains on this inconsequential town more than any other place in the United States of America. It was from this town and its gloomy, omnipresent shade that my mother escaped with me when I was only a few months old. It was in this town that I'd been compelled to spend a month every summer until I was 14. That was the year I finally put my foot down. These past 3 summers, my dad, Charlie, vacationed with me in California for 2 weeks instead. It was to Forks that I now exiled myself, an action that I took with great horror. I detested Forks." End quote. Obviously, for anyone who is not aware of that classic American novel, it is Twilight by Stephenie Meyer. So we come back to the core question here. Do I have to read the classics? Well, it's a tough question. Have to. What do we mean by have to? Do we mean ought to? Ought we to read the classics? I'm going to turn again to the field of ethics. A short introduction to moral philosophy by James Rachels. I'm not going to read the entire thing. We're just going to jump to the conclusion. We're going to imagine that the question leading into this conclusion was our question, do we have to read the classics? Rachel says, quote, "Our purpose here is not to reach any firm conclusion about which of these approaches is, if any, is correct. But we may end with the observation about how that project might be undertaken. Philosophical ideas are often very abstract, and it is difficult to see what sort of evidence counts for or against them. It is easy enough to appreciate intuitively the ideas behind each of these theories, but how do we determine which, if any, is correct? It is a daunting question. Faced with this problem, people are tempted to accept or reject philosophical ideas based on the... Let me try that again. People are tempted to accept or reject philosophical ideas on the basis of their intuitive appeal. If an idea sounds good, one might embrace it, or if it rubs one the wrong way, it may be discarded. But this is hardly a satisfactory way to proceed if we want to discover the truth. How an idea strikes us is not a reliable guide, for our intuitions may be mistaken. Happily, there is an alternative. An idea is no better than the arguments that support it. So, to evaluate a philosophical idea, we may examine the reasoning behind it. The great philosophers knew this very well. They did not simply announce their philosophical opinions. Instead, they presented arguments in support of their views. The The leading idea from the time of Socrates to the present has been that the truth is discovered by considering the reasons for and against the various alternatives. The, quote, correct, end quote, theory is the one that has the best arguments on its side. Thus, philosophical thinking consists, to a large extent, in formulating the assessing arguments. This is not the whole of philosophy, but it is a big part of it. It is what makes philosophy a rational enterprise, rather than an empty exercise in theory-mongering, end quote. Mostly, this is to say that though there may be guttural reactions to the question, do I have to read the classics, rarely will the guttural reaction be correct. As something of a smarmy jerk myself, hearing the question, do I have to read the classic, comes to an immediate answer. The immediate answer, therefore, is no. I don't have to read any classics. Look at the people around you. None of the people around you have read any of the classics, and they are doing just fine. There are millionaires and billionaires in the world who have probably never read a book. There are famous artists who will never read a book. Award-winning athletes who have never read a book. So how could it be that I have to do so? No matter what your measure for success in life is, unless your measure for success is literary scholar, no, you do not have to read the classics. But the literary curmudgeon in me hears that question and thinks, well, what else would you be reading? Do you have to read the classics? It's going to make everything else make a whole lot more sense. Do you have to read the classics? What would you rather read? Would you rather be reading Twilight? Maybe. But Twilight's going to hit you a whole lot harder if you've read Romeo and Juliet. The opening spiel to Twilight, which we just read, is going to mean a whole lot more to you if you have read As I Lay Dying and you see the similarities in those opening spiels. Similarities and differences. Do I have to read the classics? Well, there's this. By reading the classics, we're bringing the past to life now, but it's not just that metaphysical. There's more metaphysical to be had there. In fact, baby, if we really want to get hauntological, we can talk about it this way. The world in which the author of Beowulf lived is dead and gone. The entire civilization to which that individual belonged is dead and gone. The apocalypse for that person and their entire age has already come and passed. We are still reading Beowulf. By reading Beowulf, a novel, a story, however you want to look at it, a tale which will live beyond our civilization. By reading that tale, we, too, are reaching into the future. The same as you and I look at the characters in Beowulf and we know them to a large extent. We know the people who have read Beowulf up till now to a large extent, and by reading it ourselves, we are participating in that unbroken lineage which will reach out for more millennia yet. And 2,000 years from now, in our post-apocalypse, when people are rummaging through discarded McDonald's wrappers, petrified plastic doohickeys, when future millennia are wondering why the screen-worshipping culture of America fell, and they are doing their archaeological digs, finding all of our trash, someone is going to come across a copy of Seamus Heaney's Beowulf, and they will know something about us. Of course, probably, if books survive that long, whichever ones make that leap into the next couple millennia, they will be the ones that have the greatest number of copies today, and so Probably not Seamus Heaney's Beowulf. After all, how many people do you know that have that on their shelf? Probably it will be Twilight. It will be Harry Potter. It will be, dare I say it, 50 Shades of Grey, by which they know us. What I'm saying is, please buy more copies of the classics so that when these people find us, they don't think that of us. Do you have to read the classics? Do I have to read the classics? Maybe the best way to answer that question is with another question. What do you mean by classics? Which classics? Goodreads lists 1,773 must-read classics. 1,773 books divided by 12 is 147.75. So, of Goodreads' 1,773 classics, if you read one per month, it would take you 148 years. And guys, Anna Karenina is on that list. The common print version of that novel, 864 pages, you're not reading that in a month. Probably you're not reading that in a month. Not if you have a job, not if you know people, not if you have to eat or use the restroom. You're not reading that in a month and knowing anything that took place. Do you have to read the classics? No. But you probably ought to pick up at least a couple of them. And why? There are no shortage of sciences in the world. You can study rocks and know exactly what rocks are which rocks are what. You could study dinosaurs and know each osaurus from the next. You can study the stars and all of their constituent parts. You can study physics and ballistics. You can study plastics and the mystics. And all of these things can be very, very, very interesting. And some of these things could make you a whole lot of money. But in the morning, when you wake up, you will not be a ballistic. When you wake up, you will not be a physics. When you wake up, you will not be a Saurus Rex. You will not be a stalagmite, a stalactite, a graphene, or a graphite. You will be a human being, and none of those things teach you how to be a human being in the same way that does literature. Literature is for the express purpose of knowing what it is that we are. Every morning that we are fortunate enough or stupid enough to get out of bed, however it is that you choose to see that conundrum, more than philosophy, more than psychology, more even than unlimited bags of beef jerky and cigars, literature will teach us how to be and what to be, how to do and what to do, who we are and who we aren't. The quality of our very existence is best exemplified by literature. And the books that do that best, the books that do that most explicitly, the books that help us be us more than any other books are the ones that have been doing that for ages. The classics have helped people come to terms with what it means to be them for so very long, and if we should be so lucky, the classics will continue to help people understand who they are for centuries to come. For the novel excerpt this week, I am going to maintain reading As I Lay Dying in another of Darrell's chapters. We get this. He has been to town this week. The back of his neck is trimmed close, with a white line between hair and sunburn, like a joint of white bone. He has not once looked back. Jewel, I say. Back running tunneled between the two sets of bobbing mule ears, the road vanishes beneath the wagon as though it were a ribbon and the front axle were a spool. Do you know she is going to die, Jewel? It takes two people to make you, and one people to die. That's how the world is going to end. I said to Dewey Dell, you want her to die, so you can get to town. Is that it? She wouldn't say what we both knew. The reason you will not say it is, when you say it, even to yourself, you know it is true. Is that it? But you know it is true now. I can almost tell you the day when you knew it was true. Why won't you say it, even to yourself? She will not say it. She just keeps on saying, are you going to tell Pa? Are you going to kill him? You cannot believe it is true, because you cannot believe that Dewey Dell Bundren, could have had such bad luck. Is that it? The sun, an hour above the horizon, is poised like a bloody egg upon a crest of thunderheads. The light has turned copper. In the eye portentous, in the nose sulphurous, smell of lightning. When Peabody comes, they will have to use the rope. He has puzzle gutted himself, eating cold greens. With the rope they will haul him up the path, balloon-like, in the sulphurous air. Jewel, I say, do you know that Addie Bundren is going to die? Addie Bundren is going to die? If you end up reading As I Lay Dying by William Faulkner, and you should, pay special attention to the small details of things that present themselves in Darrell's chapters. Darrell is a clairvoyant, I dare say. Darrell is not of this world. And for the poem this week, a haiku that comes to us from Basho. Cicadas shrill. How silent and still, into the heart of rocks sinks the cicadas shrill. That is all I have for this episode of The Weekly Reader, the weekly podcast where we ask a big question about literature, try to answer it, and do some myriad other things. If you like or appreciate what I do here on this channel, hitting the like button really helps me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. And if you find yourself here by chance but not design, consider hitting the subscribe button to stick around for more literary goodness. I hope to have you back for the next one.